is going to be recorded. I'm starting it right now. And Matt, you're good to go.
All right. So, well, thank y'all for being here today. I hope this talk is helpful. So, my name is Matthew Layne. I'm the turf manager for UT. I work within Landscape Services, which is a department within Facilities Services. I've been here now for about 5.5 years. I have a background mainly in sports turf. I've worked for Tennessee Titans, Georgia Tech, doing primarily football fields. I have a degree in 4-year degree from the University of Tennessee in plant science with a concentration in turf grass, and I'm also currently a master's degree graduate student focusing on turf grass, and it's part-time. So either way, talk today is on home lawn care and just kind of go through the maintenance practices that we typically think about, and to just kind of bring everybody up to speed on it. So, turf grass is best grown in full sun in deep, fertile, and well-drained soils. I think that many times your grass issues are probably from the environment that you're trying to grow grass in. So I think you have to be a little understanding of the place that you're trying to grow that turf grass, correct? So, if you have a yard that really receives no sunlight, whether that's from a building or from a lot of tree canopy, having a high quality turf lawn could be extremely difficult and will take more time and care and honestly money to have that. So when we think about practices, first we always think about mowing is probably the first one that comes to mind. Then, fertility usually is maybe next, irrigation, cultivation, and then pest management. When you put all 5 of these tasks together, that really sums up, for the most part, turf management when it really talks about maintaining a stand of grass. So, all these are important, so it all just depends on how high of a quality lawn you want. And these things are all integrated into each other. So mowing, irrigation, and fertility, they really go hand in hand, because the more you irrigate and fertilize, the more you're going to have to mow. So, it's good to keep all that in mind. I don't fertilize my yard at home very often, mainly because I don't want to have to mow it too often. I do enough of grass maintenance here. But when we talk about mowing, there's Tennessee mowing, something like this. We have a nice lawn and we got a nice piece of equipment mowing Neyland Stadium. But then you got Kentucky mowing, if you're into that, so like you can totally get on this bicycle and have at it. Or you can do some Alabama mowing, that's fun, right? Rev that puppy up and go to town. So, but in the end, what we're always, most people are looking for is they're looking for something like this. They want the stripes. They want it to look aesthetically pleasing, is what comes to my mind when I think about mowing and keeping that lawn looking great. And to be honest, mowing it's a vital part of maintaining the turf grass plant as well. So one of the best rules I could tell you that you're going to want to follow is the rule of 1/3. And this all goes back to scalping. So like when you think about where you want to mow your lawn, you need to think about the height that you want to maintain it at. And then that kind of can give you an idea of when you need to mow next. If you're ever mowing off more than 1/3 of that plant, then you are scalping that plant by definition, which means you are damaging that plant. You're making it more susceptible to things like disease and drought and stress, right? So your lawn is going to be less healthy and going to have more issues. So that's an important rule to follow. So again, height of cut, though, goes with frequency. So the lower your grass is mowed, the more frequent you should mow it by definition, because that growth is going to hit that 1/3 rule much quicker. So like if you have a higher cut grass, then that means you can mow less frequently. So here's a chart just to kind of give you an idea, when we think about different types of grass. So typically in Tennessee, you can have both warm and cool season grass because we live in the transition zone. So this chart can kind of help you figure out where you might want to be. On campus, we have a combination of different grasses, both cool and warm season. We primarily have tall fescue, which is kind of like the picture I showed earlier with the pretty stripes. And then we have some common Bermuda in some of our, I'm going to say, like less maintained areas. And then we have a hybrid Bermuda that's overseed with ryegrass in our highly maintained event lawns. So here's the same chart for warm season grasses. And just to kind of back up a little bit, I guess, there's two categories of grasses. You have warm season and cool season grasses. We live in the transition zone, which means by definition, you can grow both of them equally bad. Neither one will do great. That's part of living in Tennessee. We get the winters and we get the summers. The fescue and cool season grasses, they're going to struggle in the summer. Warm seasons, they're going to struggle in the winter. So you kind of have to decide what you want to do. And that's why you see places like the event lawns on campus or Neyland Stadium that actually overseed. They have a warm season grass, but then they overseed with a cool season. That's how they're combating the idea that we don't live in a climate that really supports either one extremely well. So again, quality of cut makes a big difference, because if you're not cutting that grass smooth, then you're leaving more surface area, right? You're damaging, it's not clean cut. That plant is going to lose moisture, it's going to lose nutrients, and also gives a place for things like pests and diseases to enter. So think about, mower maintenance is extremely important. Adjusting that mower and keeping the blade sharp, all that comes into play. You want something that looks kind of like this up close. You don't want that. And this happens a lot. I mean, there's so many people that they pull the same lawnmower out every year and they've literally never changed the blade or sharpened the blade on it since the day they bought it. Your grass is probably struggling because of that. It's being damaged because it's just sitting there whipping it instead of really cutting a clean cut. So that kind of gives you an idea on some mowing stuff, and feel free to ask questions at the end when we get done with both of them if you have some more specific things. But fertilization would be the next, big category. Real quick, while we have this on here, check out the pattern on this thing. This application pattern is extremely important. And we are definitely, we've definitely messed up on campus before. I've had employees only go one direction and we get streaking, fertilizer streaking. So you have lawns that basically look like this. You'll have green patches, and hopefully you won't have completely dead, but it does happen like this. These are people at their home lawns that have fertilized one direction, and then you can see down in the brown area all that fertilizer where it basically dumped, and then the rest is basically, it's so high of a concentration. The other thing that can happen is kind of the opposite of this, is where you've spread can be extremely green, and then those places in between they don't get enough fertilizer. So either way, it's important to figure out your application rate and then to split that rate in half and do it in two different directions. That way you don't see the pattern. This kind of gives you a yearly chart of when you should fertilize your yard. So it also goes back to, depends on if you have a warm or a cool season lawn. You can see that a cool season lawn, you're primarily going to fertilize in the fall and in the spring. You're not going to fertilize during the summer. If you fertilize during the summer on a cool season grass, you're going to increase your disease chances, and you're probably going to cause yourself a lot of heartache, to be completely honest. And just to give you an idea, that's where a lot of lawn carers actually make their money, is they will fertilize your yard during the summertime, and then they'll tell you have a disease, and then they'll make you pay to treat the disease. And the reason you got the disease is because they fertilized your lawn, but they won't tell you that. So it's kind of funny. Warm season grasses you fertilize during the summertime, and then you kind of cut it off on the two ends. And that's because more fertility during the wintertime will actually damage that warm season grass and make it break down over winter. You'll have more dead, you'll have winter kill. Next would be irrigation is extremely important. I think the main note on this, some people have a home irrigation system, many do not. If you have some questions about your irrigation system, if you have one, please just ask the question later. I can go into more detail. The main point I'd like people to understand is you will probably never have a really good stand of tall fescue or bluegrass at your home in Tennessee without an irrigation system. I grow fescue at my house. It looks wonderful right now. I mean, it's immaculate. Um, in a month from now, 2 months from now, that grass will be pretty much toast. And, you know, it's just the reality of our climate. I seed it every fall and it looks great from the fall. It looks great through the spring. And then usually about the middle to end of July, it's pretty much done. So warm season grasses are much more acclimated to less irrigation. Cultivation can also be extremely important. I put this giant thing up here on the right as a joke because that thing's huge. It's like poking like a 2.5 inch rod into the ground. I've actually ran one of those when I worked in Europe. Pretty cool machine. Not realistic for this talk though. And then, you know, thatch management and things like this. This really comes down to your yard. If you're growing a cool season grass, I will tell you, unless you're like driving across your lawn or something a whole lot, you probably don't need to worry about cultivation a whole bunch. It all goes back to use of your lawn. How much compaction are you causing on your lawn, right, to need to relieve? If nothing's happened on your lawn in the last year since you aerated, you don't need to aerate again because nothing's compacted it. Now, if you've had a party out there, if you drive across it regularly, say you have a boat that maybe you park out there or something like that, I would suggest aerating every year. And maybe if you don't do a lot of that, maybe take it and say, hey, I'm going to aerate every other year, every third year. Because a lot of times people kind of waste their time and money on aerating a lawn that honestly doesn't need it. You've been better off spraying the weeds out and just doing some seeding and fertilizing. You know, thatch management, you know, if you have a warm season lawn, thatch management is extremely important. If you have a cool season lawn, not so much because of the way they grow. Cool season grasses are bunch type grasses. Warm season grasses for the most part are all spreading grasses. So they're stoloniferous. So like a lot of that thatch is not actually created in cool season grasses. Just to give you an idea, we don't dethatch cool season grasses lawns on this campus. We dethatch warm season lawns. So just to give you an idea of what you may want to do and may not want to do depending on which grass you have, which goes back to probably the main thing. First step is to figure out what grass do you have, because that is going to depict almost everything that you do. Weeds are, you know, weeds are not the cause of a bad lawn. A bad lawn is what causes weeds. We have a lot of weeds on campus. Do not get me wrong. We struggle with it every day, and we try to do our best. But you know, just to give you an idea, there's the weeds didn't pop up there because they popped up there because there was a niche available, and that niche was created because of bare spots, issues in the lawn, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So then what I kind of want to just get in your head is that there's a few different categories of weeds. And the reason that's important to know is what category of weed you're dealing with is because it goes back to what chemical and what issue might be causing that weed. The first would be a monocot, which all plants are monocots or dicots. Monocots are grassy plants. It goes back to genetics, but either way, it's important to note that if you have a grassy weed, you're going to need a chemical that can take out a grassy weed. So we'll talk more about it as we go. So grassy monocots, you know, then we have things like rushes, and then we have sedges. And then we also have dicots or broadleaves. So again, all that is important. And all to say is that when you go to a website, and I think, Sammy, are you sharing this presentation afterwards?
Yes, I'll be sending out the link to
Okay.
everybody.
So this first link is extremely helpful, and it's actually produced by the University of Tennessee, the turf department here. And you can click on this app, and it runs like an app. I have it on my phone saved. And what you can do is you can actually select the weed. So you can actually select the grass that you have, right? So again, it goes back, you need to know what grass you have. And then you can select the weed you're trying to control in that grass, and it will list which chemicals are best. And then you can go to a Site One or another landscape supply store and actually buy the best chemical to kill said weed. So identification of a weed is extremely important when you're trying to kill it, because to know what chemical will affect it the most. That resource, I give that to almost anybody that really wants to do a lot of lawn care. That way they can identify what truly to buy so they don't waste their money. And I think that's the biggest thing. The others are very useful. After that first one, I would actually probably skip down to the last one. Our UT Turf website isn't the best. I actually use NC State's turf website. They actually have a really good turf website for things like disease, identifying your grass, you name it, they have it. It's Turf Files at NC State is a great resource. And that's all I kind of got. I was trying to keep it to 15 minutes. I guess we'll answer questions at the end. I hope that was helpful. I know it's a very broad concept, but it's kind of a quick talk. So thank y'all.
Thanks, Matt. I feel like I learned a lot, and I work with you every day. So
There you go.
that should be reassuring. Okay, next up we have Sam Adams with our arboriculture department, and he is going to take it away from here.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to get my slide presentation up here real quick. And we will get started. There we go. Hope everybody's doing really well today. So yes, I'm Sam Adams. I'm the campus arborist here at the University of Tennessee and Facility Services. I take care of the management of all the trees here on campus. We've got right around 8,000 trees on the main campus of the University of Tennessee main campus and also the agriculture campus. We do quite a bit of work on trees on campus. The vast majority of our trees on campus are in the young age class. So we do a lot of pruning for development of our future canopy. 80% of the work we do is in young trees that have been planted in the last 3 to 15 years. And then we do some larger mature tree planting, maintenance and planting as well. My topic is tree and shrub pruning, why, when, and how. You know, we're probably going to spend a lot more time talking about shrubs than trees. Young trees, a lot of the top topics that we're going to be talking about will fit in with what we're talking about, but the majority of pruning is, say, in mature trees. That's usually to be left up to a qualified arborist that has the equipment and the ability to get into your trees. So I have a lot of people ask me, when should I prune my plants? I had a guy come up to me about 3 weeks ago, and my neighbor has a peach tree, and her peach tree was in full blossom, and he came up to me and he goes, "Hey, when should I prune my peach tree?" And I was like, January would have been a good time to prune your peach tree. And why is that so? Well, because it would fall into the category of a spring blooming tree or shrub. It's one that will, forms the buds in late summer, or it forms buds on new growth in the spring. So you don't want to prune it, right at the time of its blossom or right before it, because you'll lose blooming points. So spring blooming shrubs, these are shrubs that will put on their buds in the late summer, but they bloom early spring. So a good example would be such as rhododendron, azalea, forsythia, red twig dogwood would be examples of those. And what you can do with those plants is that with your rhododendron, you can, after they have bloomed, you could prune those bud points off, but you want to make sure that you have prune them before mid-summer. That way, as the plant develops into the rest of the growing season, they will develop those annual buds for the next year's growing season. So If you've ever noticed on, let's say, rhododendron is a perfect example. After it blooms, the spent blossoms are there. Those will fall off, and at around August or September, you'll see another great big bud form at the tip end of the branch, real close to where that recent flower bud was. So the elongation of the twig, and then the new bud is formed. And you want to make sure that that stays on the plant until it blooms again in the spring. Same with azaleas, same with your red twig dogwoods and forsythia and ninebark. And then summer blooming shrubs. So these are going to be plants that they form on new twigs. So as an example, that would be most of your fruit trees. Those are ones that you would want to prune during dormancy. And usually dormancy would be sometime after we've had a good hard freeze, say November or December, through till about the end of February or early March. And some examples of those guys are roses and hydrangeas, and spireas and fruit trees. Roses are a very specific example. And one of the things you can use as a rule of thumb for roses was what we do at our house is that we will usually prune our roses just about the time the forsythia are blooming. And you will gotten your growing points ready to go, and you will usually get a fairly good blossom. But let's not talk about all the other stuff that you have to do to roses to get really good blossoms, because they're a whole lot of work. And I saw in one of the questions, what are some easy plants for an amateur landscaper? I'd say, don't start with roses. But if you decide to go with roses, enjoy them and enjoy the hard work. They do pay off, that's for sure. Another example is hydrangeas there, the plant on the right with the white blossoms. Often if the plant is planted well, you don't have to do a whole lot of pruning. And maybe what you'll be doing is mostly just deadheading, which will be snipping off the dead blossoms, the spent blossoms, I should say, either once they're done in the fall or sometime in the spring. The spent blossoms on those plants can actually give nice winter interest throughout the year, so you can have the spent blossoms on the plant throughout the winter, and then snip them off or pinch them off in the spring right before they are going to bloom again in the summer. So why do we prune them? So we want to maintain size and form sometimes, especially if plants have been planted maybe a little bit closer than would be ideal, so they can't grow to their full form and not be too crowded, let's say, or get too close to a building or overgrow on a walk or something like that. So you want to do some pruning techniques that will accomplish those goals. And so we'll talk about that, maintaining for size and form. To direct growth. Sometimes the growth will get too heavy on one side, grow much more towards the sunlight. Let's say you've got a shrub that's close to the side of a building or the shade of a tree, doesn't get as much sun on one side and the other side overgrows it. Well, you can shape it a little bit to sort of balance those kinds of issues out and direct the growth where you need it to. And then rejuvenation pruning. A lot of shrubs in our landscapes can last for many, many years. But sometimes they will get overgrown to a point where you'll start seeing dead stems or stems that have a whole lot of growth out at the tips, but not, in the center of the plant. And so we can talk about rejuvenation pruning a little bit as well on that. So the different types of pruning that we would be using mostly would be thinning, heading or reduction pruning, or shearing. So thinning and heading, these two examples, the one on my left would be a thinning pruning, and you can see how selective stems are being pruned off, not only at the ground line, but at the midpoint of the plant. You're also doing a little bit of reduction pruning where you're making stems, as an example. Can you see my mouse? Can people see my mouse? Yeah, so as an example here, where this section got reduced and now you're redirecting this branch line in another way. And it'll give the plant a little bit more overall symmetrical look to it. So, you know, venture into doing some things like that, looking into the shrub and seeing where you can make reduction cuts, thinning cuts, entire stem removals, and all of these types of cuts would fall into a number of the different methods that I'm going to be talking about. This on the right, where you can see these green tips, you would make these cut points here. That would be heading cuts, usually right above a bud point. But you can see how it's reducing it back to the stem, back to a specific point on the stem, the individual stems. And then rejuvenation pruning is one where you've got an older shrub and you've got a lot of stems that have maybe not as vigorous, or as I said before, you know, all their growth is out the tips and you don't have a whole lot of foliage in the interior of the plant. Sometimes it can take as much as 3 growing seasons to get the plant completely rejuvenated. And to do that is to sort of squint your eyes down and look for those stems that you think are not as vigorous as the other stems. Focus on them, prune them back to the ground line, and leave some other stems so that they can gather sunlight and store energy for the rest of the plant, keep the root system healthy. And then the next year go in and prune out those remaining stems so that by the 3rd year, you've got 2 growing seasons of rejuvenated stems coming up. Some plants that respond very well to rejuvenation are old hollies. If their root system is good and healthy, you can do, even though sometimes those are on a single stem, you can prune out large branch sections on those back to the main stem. They will throw out new growth, and you can continue to do that for a couple of years until you've got your shrub back to an appearance that you want. And other ones are rhododendron. People think, oh, we got to keep your hands off your rhododendrons. But actually, if you, rhododendrons in this zone can be very susceptible to drought and also freeze. And so we'll get some disease issues that are brought in by plant stress, either from drought or freeze. And if you start seeing dieback, or if you start seeing the leaves folding and turning brown in the midsummer period, you've got a disease, a tip blight called Botrysphaeria, more than likely. And that stem will probably die back to the most vigorous part of the plant, wherever that might be. So if you see cupping and folding of brown leaves on, say, a rhododendron or an azalea, then it may be a good time to go in there and prune out some of those effective stems. You can do that by cutting them all the way back to the ground line, and they will reiterate new foliage, new healthy foliage, and in a couple of growing seasons, you won't even know that it had a problem. Usually once you get in with a stress-related disease with rhododendrons, watering is a good plan during dry spells, and then a little bit of fertilization in the spring and the fall. And there's a lot of good guidelines out there about fertilization for rhododendrons and azaleas. And then shearing. Shearing is a complicated subject for me. I'm not a huge fan of shearing, but it's extremely important for formal landscapes. There's some plants that are really, really well adapted for shearing. Yews are very good for shearing. Hemlock, Eastern hemlock is a really good shearing plant. Boxwoods, of course, are really good shearing plants. But a lot of other plants really aren't suited to it, but they get sheared anyways. And one of the problems that comes about with shearing is that either the shearing has been done too heavily and you're scalping it. And one of the things you want to make sure you do when you're shearing is you don't want to take off more than 1/3 or more of the most recent growing material. So it's really similar to what Matthew was talking about earlier with turf. You want to be very careful. If you've got last year's growth is 2 inches long, then you definitely don't want to take more than, you don't want to take half of that growth off. You want to just take a third of it off. So take off small amounts at a time to keep the shape that you need. Old hedges actually sometimes will have to get rejuvenated. And so those, and that is a huge process, because if you can imagine, if you're shearing the outside edges of a shrub bank or a long hedge for a period of time, most of the foliage will be out on those outer inches of the plant. And it'll be very dense on the outer edge and very sparse in the interior. So it's very easy, if you get in there and don't rejuvenate at the right time, or scalp it in too deeply, you might lose that entire section of the plant due to sun scald or disease introduction and things like that. So shearing is a very, it takes a lot of work, and is, I think, used too often on landscape plants that really don't need to be sheared. If you feel like the size of the plant is too big, then maybe you planted the wrong plant. And that would be remove the plant and plant a plant that would be suitable to the size of the space that you have to plant it in. So you can see in this landscape here at Hopecote House, where there's a combination of trees and shrubs that are there in their normal form. The white blooming magnolia right there in the center of the building, we very rarely touch. It would be considered one of those spring blooming plants that you could go in and prune it now during this period if you needed to, and it would set buds for next year and they would blossom in the spring again. But if you prune that tree too early, let's say you prune that during the dormant period, you would lose many of your flower buds, and you wouldn't have a blossom as impressive as that one is right there. Below and to the right of that tree is some laurel shrubs, and those, if you pick the right size cultivar, they can stay in their natural form without having to be sheared. But then you see there's a sheared hedge on the left side of the house that's being maintained so that the roof line and the window lines can be maintained. And that's a perfectly appropriate approach there as well. So as you can see, my opinion is that shearing is a touchstone for me. I think it's a great method, but it's also sometimes overused and leads to complications for people in their landscapes. So some basic pruning tools I would think that you'd want to have on hand are lopping shears, handsaw, and pruning shears, as well as hedging shears. Again, at my house, the hedging shears hardly ever come out, but the lopper, the handsaw, and the hand pruning shear come out quite a bit. Those are always in my toolbox, and I'm using them all over the landscape at all time. Buy the best quality tool that you can. There are some really good brands out there. This little hand pruner, well, actually all of these are made by a company called Felco, and they make really good hand tools. They will last you a long, long time if you take care of them well. And so it kind of takes the sting out of the price of buying those tools, because they can be kind of expensive, but they will last you a long time and serve you well. So we're going to talk a little bit about specifics on pruning. Here's this would be an example of a pruning for a tree. If you're going to take a somewhat large branch off, 2-3 inch branch, there's a couple of things that you want to do first, rather than just pruning it right off at this point with one cut. What you risk doing is ripping the trunk wood down below the branch. And so take a minute and make a couple of cuts on the branch beforehand. Your first cut should be below and go into about 1/3 to 1/2 into the branch. You'll know you've cut far enough, because when the branch comes down, it's going to pinch your handsaw, and now you're stuck and you don't know what to do from there. But if you don't make your cut too deep, then you take your saw back out, go out a couple of inches away from that previous cut, make your second cut on top, and snap your branch away, and then finish, make your final cut right here in this area. that, as you can see, it says leave the collar intact. So generally on most trees, there is a swollen area at the base of the branch that is called the branch bark collar. And that is actually trunk wood. And everything outside of that is branch wood. So you want to make a cut that's as close to the branch, the trunk collar without cutting into it, so that the trunk collar will close over that wound rapidly. And then this little ridge is almost always formed on most trees, and that'll give you another guideline. Ideally making cuts that leaves the final cut as small a surface area as possible and as close to circular as you can make it is a great way to finish a pruning cut. On shrubs, now there's a couple of really good guidelines to use. So you can see these, out of these 5 examples, 3 of them are to this, to that, or to the other. 45-degree angle just outside of the bud on plants that have buds that are arranged alternately, meaning there's a bud on one side of the stem and a bud on the other side of the stem, and they arrange themselves in an alternate pattern along the stem. Then you would cut just above, wherever you're going to make your cut it just above the last bud that you want as your final bud point. If you have opposite budding, as in many of our maples, our hydrangeas, those would be plants that you would prune with leaving just a little bit of a raised area just past the buds. But you can see in these examples, too angular, too long right here opens the plant up to a larger surface area, greater possibility for insect or disease issues, primarily disease. If you cut this one here, the bud could desiccate. There would be not enough tissue to support the bud, and it would desiccate and probably die back to the next bud line. And then this too high cut here is also the same thing. It could lead to disease issues. It will definitely die back to the next bud, and sometimes that dieback could extend back to the next healthy bud as well. So using those 2 guidelines of just outside the bud lines on the opposites and alternate budding should get you a long ways on that. So on roses, you would make this 45 angular cut. Fruit trees, you would make this 45-degree angular cut. Hydrangeas and other opposite leaved or budded plants, you would make that kind of flat cut across. And that was the quick version of pruning trees and shrubs. There's my contact information there. Always feel free to contact me with my email or my phone number, but don't call me after work. And but I'd love to talk to you during work hours and send me an email. I look forward to hearing from you anytime. I hope this has been helpful to you, and I know Matthew and I both look forward to visiting with you guys, and Sam and Rebecca, I appreciate you guys setting this up a lot.
Thank you, Sam. I just learned that I'm doing everything wrong. So most of you are probably doing better than I am. So we will open it up to questions. Now, if you have questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask those questions, type those in the chat, and we'll share them. You can either put them to everyone in the chat or a direct message to me, and I can read those for you. We have one to start off with. So Matt talked about the different types of grass and the ways that you need to accommodate for both. But what if a yard is mostly clover? What do we do in that case, Matt?
Yeah, so I would suggest first killing that clover out. It probably depends on what you want to establish after that. More than likely, you probably have some warm season grass, probably Bermuda grass growing within that. Understand that if you have large patches of clover, that it's probably going to not be the most attractive thing. Like when you spray that clover, there's not going to be like this wonderful like yard pop up underneath it. And yeah, y'all laugh. I've had to explain that to quite a few people. And so just understand that the best time to like plant a cool season grass is in the fall. So the best time to spray a lot of those weeds out, and what I do at my yard is I make 1 application a year, typically maybe 2, but mostly just 1 of a broadleaf herbicide. and I spray all the weeds out of my yard in the early fall, typically around the beginning of September, maybe August. So the end of August, beginning of September, the best time to seed things like tall fescue or other cool season grasses is like the last 2 weeks of September and the first 2 weeks of October. So it kind of gives you an idea. So like you're going to have the least amount of time that your yard's going to look not so nice, basically. And what you're doing too, by spraying before you seed, is you're opening up all those niches within that category. You're opening up all those little areas for that seed to then take over. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Matt. A couple more questions have popped up already. I have crabgrass in my front yard. What is the best thing to use to get rid of it?
Yeah, so the best thing to do with crabgrass is to prevent it. So
That's helpful.
Yeah. Well,
Way to go, Matt.
Yeah, let me go into that a little bit further. So crabgrass is an annual plant. It typically dies off in the wintertime. Now, don't get me wrong, if we do not have a harsh winter, sometimes some crabgrass can exist. What you typically see right now, and don't get me wrong, crabgrass is actually starting to germinate. I saw the question, is it too late now? The beginning of germination is typically the end of March, beginning of April. Crabgrass is usually kind of towards the end of that, so kind of like the end of April and May. So you still have time to probably cover like 90% of that seed population that might germinate. The best thing to do is to put out a pre-emergent herbicide in granular form in the spring. I would suggest that you put that out in March on a normal year. So you would basically go ahead and do it as soon as you can. There's two ways to do that. You can do it through a single application or through a split application. For a homeowner, the best choice is a split application. So basically you'll be able to read it on the bag, and it'll probably have both options labeled. It'll probably say, for a single application, put this much out per 1,000 square feet. You've got to know how much lawn you have. So you're going to want to measure kind of know how many square feet or like a half acre. You're going to want to know a decent estimate of how much lawn you have to know how much to buy. And then you're going to put out a single application would be around the end of March. If you're doing a split, you would do March and then also in May. And the split is better if you have the labor basically to do it, which if you're doing your home lawn, you would, because the chemical will exist in the soil profile for longer. As far as crabgrass that's currently up, there are some chemicals that can kill crabgrass when they're in the 1 to 2 leaf stage, which would be right now between now and the end of May. And you can look at products like Speed Zone and Q4. They both, you could look at that and go to like a site one and just ask the guys at the counter. I mean, and use that app. You can use that app and it will tell you what chemicals to use, which is a great tool. So it'll actually list chemicals for pre and post. That's another thing on that thing. You have to check whether you're trying to post or control or pre. Pre is before it germinates, post is after. So important on that app to check which one you want.
You guys amaze me with your knowledge. That you just knew that off the top of your head is just mind-blowing to me.
I was just
We have
thinking
another
it's very
question
nice that
here.
we have professional for campus, and that's why campus looks so good. And this is excellent that they're sharing this information with us so that we can hopefully improve the way our own homes look.
I also feel completely overwhelmed, but that's just me. Next question. If I have a new build house and I just put grass seed and hay down on the clay below, do you have any tips for helping that grow? There's quite a bit of shade in this area near the house.
Yeah. So I guess, is it already up? Who is it? Is the grass currently up and growing?
Yes, some of it is. In
yes.
certain spots.
Okay, so what I would say is, one, it's not the time of year for grass seed, so just go ahead and like understand that it is going to die. I will just flat out tell you, it more than likely 90% of what you have down will probably not make it. So you need to plan to reseed in the fall, and it's just because the grass is too immature to handle the summer heat in Tennessee. So not that you shouldn't have, you should have, because you want to control erosion, right? So like you don't want to like have a larger issue. So like you kind of have to seed now, but just know that you're going to want to seed and really get that seed worked in the fall. So what I would suggest is actually just doing a little bit of watering and maybe put a little bit of fertilizer out. You don't want to do a lot because again, you don't want to like have that fertilizer run off of bare soil. So you kind of have to be a little bit careful. But the best thing to do is really focus and put some money into that lawn this fall. And what I would say a good tactic would actually be is to rent a slit seeder. You can go to any lawn, like any rental store, and rent a slit seeder from them, like a United rental, and rent it for a day. And it's really not that expensive. And what it is basically a bunch of saw blades underneath this, and it cuts grooves into that dirt, and it gives a place for that seed to sit. And that way it doesn't get washed off. So what you could do is you could slit seed into that lawn and also spray the weeds when they come up. Spray them like I talked about earlier in the fall. And that'll give you your best lawn. But just understand that it's going to be a little bit of a process to get that established and get it going. And you have to use the seasonality is everything in our industry. And I think a lot of times people forget that.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Sam, I was noticing some questions came in yesterday in advance of our group. One of those was, let's see, best plantings for bees and butterflies and hummingbirds, annual or perennial. I think one of the best ways for bees and hummingbirds is having a variety of plants that will bloom throughout the growing season. Think about some of the plants that are coming on early in the growing season, but so that I've just started seeing butterflies emerging recently in the last, say week or so. Hummingbirds should be showing up right about now. So be looking for plants that are blooming right now. Those will give you indications of what those bees and hummingbirds would be looking for. But holly is a good foundation plant or that's blooming right now that has a lot of nectar for bees. And then along with that, something like later in the summer, echinacea, bee balm are good plants. Nine bark is a really good plant for that. Even varieties of grasses, they provide cover for them, and having active water on the site. If you fill your bird baths up, because bees will come and actively harvest water from your bird bath as well. So there's a lot of good resources out there for if you want to have a pollinator gardens adding, and specifically for our region. UT Gardens is a really great resource too. They've got some pollinator habitats at UT Gardens. Shall I read another one, Sam?
Yeah, let's go for it. We can address as many of those as we can get
Okay.
to in our time, unless there are other questions that pop up, and feel free to
Sure.
keep those coming.
Somebody wanted to know about ways to have color all year round. So, there's some plants that come to mind right off the bat, some good old southern plants like camellias that, there are some varieties of camellias now that you can get that are a little bit better for our slightly northern climate here, slightly. You'll get blossoms. You can get them so that they bloom in, say, late October, November, or December. We also have witch hazel, several different hazels that will bloom in the wintertime. January, February are some good plants. There's one that you don't see very, Cornus officinalis, which is Cornell cherry or Cornell dogwood. It bloomed in February. There's one in the gardens that bloomed in February. There are some early blooming cherry trees that bloom in January and February as well. Another thing to keep in mind is winter interest. It could be that you won't be getting any blossoms, but it could have showy bark or showy twigs. Red twig dogwood is one of those. It'll drop its leaves, but it'll have really bright red or yellow, some kind of yellow twigs, and that'll provide some color. Paper bark maple is a really beautiful tree that has a papery bark that gives you winter interest. hydrangeas I talked about earlier. If you keep the spent flower heads on there, they will give you some winter interest. And also spring birds will come in and they'll use some of that material to make nest material out of. So if you keep some of your older stuff there, birds and other folks will come in and use that material for nesting. So that would be my answer on that one, I think.
We do have another question that's come in. Lisa had a tree with poison ivy vine that was cut in her backyard, but she still has some of the poison ivy popping up in the yard, and some of those vines are trying to gravitate to other trees in her yard. So how should she get rid of that?
Well, okay, so if it's a single large vine, or obviously cutting it carefully and making sure that you don't get any of any issues from the cutting of it. But when you cut it, treat it almost immediately with a concentrated herbicide such as Roundup. Treat the cut point with that herbicide so it will go down into the root system and kill the plant to the root. If you see it popping up, that's a natural response to a cut plant. Many cut plants and poison ivy is one of those that it will respond by putting out root shoots, and then the foliage will pop up in other places. That's usually going to mean an herbicide treatment like Roundup. Again, spot spraying, doing it carefully so that you don't kill the turf that Matt has just given you so much good information on getting looking good. But you will need every once in a while to go in and spot spray, and a non-selective herbicide, broadleaf herbicide like Roundup would probably be your best bet.
Kristen also said that you had alluded to this earlier, but what are some good plants, flowers, shrubs for beginners, for those of us who kill everything that we touch?
Well, then, but I would say right off the bat, buy dead plants, and then you're 100% right there. But aside from that, there are some really great varieties of hollies and all kinds of different sizes of them. So, spend time thinking about what size plant is going to fit in the area that you want to work in, and then work back from there. There's some really, I think some of the hydrangeas are really durable. Limelight, oak leaf hydrangea are really great. Let's see, laurels, English laurels, Skipensis, which is a fairly large growing shrub, often will be grown into hedges, which is really inappropriate for that plant. Allow it to be a large plant and give it plenty of room. Plant them 8 feet apart and allow them to get up to their 12 to 15 feet height. But then there are also autoleuchin laurels that stay a little bit lower. And a lot lower, actually. They might only get up to about 3 feet high and about 3 or 4 feet broad. So again, give the shrubs plenty of room to meet their full potential so that you don't have to prune them too often or maintain a shape on them. I even think rhododendrons and azaleas are pretty easy plants to grow. But if you've got any concerns about the heavy clays or things like that, then getting a soil test in advance to find out what your pH is, so that you don't want to start the plant out in a soil that it just won't grow in. But that is getting a little bit more complicated. There are a lot of plants that will definitely grow in a wide range of soil conditions, and those ones that I just mentioned will do that for you.
A couple more questions coming in. They're coming fast. Do you know if we can get a soil test without mailing it?
Not that I know of.
No.
You pretty much have to mail it in to the state. There's a state lab in Nashville that you can mail it to. And then there's some other private labs that you can mail it to, like Waypoint and some others. I would say it's very cheap. It's really not a lot of money. It's not very difficult. You just kind of want to take different samples. Like it depends on what if you're sampling like your landscape bed, then I would take multiple samples within your bed. And then same thing in the lawn. If you're worried about the lawn, I would take multiple samples throughout your lawn. You put those samples together and that gives you like kind of like an average across that area.
And if you want some like on-site help with that, call your extension agent.
Mm.
You know, Knox County or, you know, your county extension agent, that's, you know, that's what they're there for. They can come out, they'll give you all kind of guidance. They can help you actually take the sample. Sometimes they'll take the sample for you and send it off and then get that information back. So it doesn't mean that you would not still pay for the fees on it, but they can help you with those kinds of things. And they're gonna be a fantastic resource for those kinds of issues as well.
Thank you both so much.
Couple more questions that have come in. Is there any hope for an out of control pussy willow, or should I just cut it all down?
No, out of control pussy willow. Well, yeah, I mean, well, I would say that if it's really just gotten way bigger than you thought you wanted it to be, that's one of those plants you could probably cut it down to the ground line and let it get up to the size that you want it to get to. And then when it does that again, cut it back to the ground again. And maybe that's the way to get to, you know, that happy medium of it's growing too big. Well, maybe that using that guideline of the rejuvenation pruning, maybe it's, if it's putting up multiple stems, take out the most egregious of them, prune those back to the ground, allow the other ones to stay. And then, you know, the next year, those ones that stayed might be the egregious stems and prune those out. And so gradually you're just sort of maintaining this happy medium with a plant that's really going to want to grow a lot. They're a pretty fast growing plant, but they do have some great qualities to them. They've got winter interest as well as early, early season budding and things like that. So pretty cool plant. Does that help?
Matt, the next one is directed to you. When we're talking about grass treatments, is a 3-in-1 grass treatment a good thing to use for a yard, or should you do weed treatment, fertilization, and seeding separately?
Separate. Yeah, you should do it separate. All those products they're really not very effective generally. It's usually sold by like a Scott's Lawn Care. You buy it at Lowe's. For one, you overpay by a lot because they usually have a lot of inert material in them, which basically means it's not useful. The herbicides that are generally can be put through the soil profile and taken up are generally not the best, most effective herbicides. What I would actually suggest is that you can do what I do. I buy 1 bag of grass seed. I go to Site One Landscape, which one they have more what I would consider like professional products that are not, you're going to get more for your dollar, I guess is the fact is people go there to buy it when they're running a business, right? So they know what the prices are. There's a bunch of different locations. The best one for turf is off of Weisgarber Road. So Site One Landscape Supply. You can buy, your grass seed there. You can buy your fertilizer there and your chemicals. And then do what I do at my house. I went to Harbor Freight. I bought the cheapest backpack sprayer, which is $20. And I've used that thing for 5 years now, and it's great. Just saying, $20 at Harbor Freight, you can have a nice backpack sprayer to like spray weeds. And I actually have separate ones. I have a backpack sprayer for my broadleaf weeds to spray my lawn. And then I actually have 2 other backpacks. I have one for, or not backpacks, like the little sprayers, like the 1 gallons. And I've used one for Roundup, and I label it to never put, you don't want to mix Roundup, like a non-selective herbicide, in a backpack or a container that you're also going to be mixing a selective herbicide. So there's 2 categories, selective, non-selective. And so keep those separate, buy them, they're super cheap, but then go there and then get those products separately, because those 3-in-1s and stuff, you're really kind of, they're kind of getting you on this concept like it's going to be super easy, and it ends up costing you more money. It's not going to be super effective. Fertilizer, always look for like a slow release, something that has a lot of like at least 50% slow release fertilizer. When you go to like a Weisgarber, ask them for it. They'll know what you need. So like I would always suggest using a slow release. That way it's something, and what that means is all that fertilizer is not like immediately available. Some will be available immediately, and then others will slowly go out throughout time, whether that is either through temperature control, moisture control, or like a microbial activity. So hope that.
All right, y'all, we have hit our 1 hour mark, and I know some of you probably need to go. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to both of our presenters, Great information, very helpful, I think. If you do have any additional questions, Sam and Matt, if you're able to stay around for a few more minutes, we'll stay
Sure.
on. If
Yeah.
not, you're free to go. I will send you the recording afterwards. So thank you all for being with us today.
Thanks,
And I'd like
everybody.
to-
Yep.
I'd like to chime in real fast and just say, this is something that we do on a 3 or 4 times a year. And if there are other home care questions that you have that someone in facility services could address, topics that would be of interest to you, please don't hesitate to let us know. You can reach us. You can reach me directly at fstraining@utk.edu. I'm Rebecca Alcorn. I'm the training coordinator for facility services. And just so you know, everything that we do runs the gamut from landscape to custodial to plumbing and painting and construction and air conditioning and electrical. So we have a ton of different services that we provide to the department or to the university. And all of those topics do relate to home care. So if there's something that you have questions about or would be interested in hearing about, please don't hesitate to let us know. Thank you so much for joining us and hope you have a great day.
Well, it looks like it might be a wrap.
Maybe so. Great job.
That was excellent.
Oh,
guys.
thanks,
That
guys.
was excellent. Very
All right.
informative.